Educator for, thanks, Heather. This is being recorded, just so you all know as well. So if you missed something and want to go back and rewatch the recording, feel free. I'm a Sustainable Agriculture Educator for OEFFA, the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. And if you all watched the first episode, I guess, of the Organics 101, this will be part 2, so looking at whether to certify or not to certify. I tend to be pretty informal, so if you have a question as we're going, just feel free to either throw it in the chat or raise your hand or whatever works best for you. I've got a presentation and plenty of time for questions, and I'd really like it to be as interactive as you all feel comfortable with. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll run through this PowerPoint. The joys of PowerPoint. Okay, so to certify or not to certify, one of the things that I wanted to kind of give you an introduction, and my background is this as well, but this is my family's farm. I talked about this in the previous one, so if you've already heard this, just ignore. But yeah, so my family farm started off as like a cow-calf operation, and we raised pigs when I was a kid as well. It's in East Central Ohio, and one of the reasons that I wanted to reference this, you can kind of see a lay of the land. One of the things that we'll talk about is kind of knowing your site and knowing what resources you have available to you at a particular site. So we'll look at an example of a web soil survey for this particular part of the farm. One of the things that I think is really important to do is kind of know what you're dealing with and kind of where your source of information is. So this is where I grew up. Like I said, it's been in the family for quite a while, almost 200 years at this point. And it's grassy and hilly and has its own set of challenges. OEFFA, as we like to refer to it, or the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, this is our mission. It was founded by farmers back in 1979, basically looking to have a type of organic certification that was basically governed by farmers, to have a set of standards that they could then adhere to and use that organic label. That's evolved significantly, particularly as the organization has grown and what certification sort of means up to this point. So what OEFFA does on a daily basis is we have an annual conference that draws in about 1,000 folks every year. That's in the Newark, Granville area of Ohio. We do farm tours, workshops, webinars like this one. We do a lot of farm policy work, particularly in years like this, which is a farm bill year, so very important. Additionally, we have a begin farming program and an outreach program that sort of helps folks get started in the farming process as a whole, as well as helps those folks that have already started maybe, but need a little bit of extra support as they're going. And then we have a whole separate side of the organization that does organic certification. Particularly in the last segment of this Organics 101 series, you'll learn a lot more about the certification process and why there is a separate part of OEFFA as opposed to the side that I work on, which is education. I did work on the certification side at one point in time too, and did organic inspections as well. So that's a little bit about the organization and a little bit about me. This is a reuse of a slide from the last time, because I think it's really important to understand what organic means. And it really does mean something entirely different depending upon who you ask. So to a lot of our farmers that have been certified for a long period of time, they've got a pretty good understanding of what organic certification is and what the process entails, but they also are generally in touch with sort of the fundamentals of why they want to be certified. So sort of the spirit of organic, as opposed to just this is what the standards say. So organic can be anything from a small, diverse farm like this one on the slide on the left, or it can be a larger scale soybean field, which has a nice undercoating there of organic matter as well. So both of these could be certified organic farms, depending upon your definition of it. And I think that's one of the things that's really important to consider when you're thinking about organic certification is, what do you want your farm to look like? What's your scale? What are some of the things to consider there? One thing that we know it's not is this. So this is not an organic operation. This doesn't meet standards, and it definitely doesn't meet the spirit. And same with your typical row crop farm. It's going to be predominantly monocultures, usually corn, soybeans, wheat, depending upon your part of the country. Could also be rice or sugar beets or whatever. It tends to be dominated by just one or two crops in whatever that system is, and relies pretty heavily on synthetic inputs. And that's one of the key differentiators of organic versus conventional agriculture. Also, not organic. One of the requirements in the standard is that any grazing animal has access to pasture. At least 30% of their food has to come from pasture. So these cows don't have any pasture. Ultimately, what organic is a marketing label. So you are using that set of standards and using those practices to say, my farm does these things and we do this, for whatever reason. Sorry about that. And since OEFFA was a certifier back in the late 70s, early 80s, other entities like the CCOF, which is the California Certified Organic Farmers, another farmer-based certification entity, they didn't all have the same set of standards though. So the National Organic Program was developed by the USDA to serve as that clear set of organic standards, or the rule as it's known. And that basically allows people to use the organic seal. If you are not certified organic, you can't use either of these two labels. You can't put certified organic on anything. There's a whole set of what you can and can't do, which is kind of great because it does give you that sort of backing that what you're doing meets these standards, and therefore you can use this as a marketing option. And I keep saying that it's a marketing option because it falls under the Ag Marketing Service. So that's the division of the USDA that it falls under. There is a National Organic Standards Board that basically advises the USDA on what can be done, what is allowed, what isn't allowed, basically how the practices work. And that's a good way too for the average consumer or farmer to interact with the standards and sort of shape the way that the system works. The real keys sort of underlying all of this are these organic practices, which I say that it's really information heavy because it does involve a lot of research ahead of time. Both research to figure out sort of what practices might work on your farm, as well as knowing what the standards are, what the certification process is, because it really is sort of a whole systems approach. Biodiversity is one of the things, when I used to teach at a college teaching sustainable agriculture, I would always talk about, biodiversity. If you look at a natural system, the more diverse the system is, the more resilient it is to challenges. So if you have 100 different species versus 5 different species, the 100 species system is going to be more resistant to changes in climate, major pest issues, all of those kinds of things. So going back to that conventional or industrial agricultural system where it's corn, soybeans, wheat, it's one crop. there is no biodiversity there. So we try to encourage any of our certified organic operations or somebody that's interested in organic to be as diverse as possible, both from a market perspective, so market diversity, as well as an overall sort of biological diversity as well. And the key foundation of all organic is soil health. So you all might be listening for different reasons. You may be a beginning farmer that's interested in potentially getting certified. You could be somebody that's been farming for 30 years that might want to transition and switch. And you could be coming to organics in a lot of different ways. I first got interested in organic agriculture as a whole, not so much because of the farm or anything that was going on the farm and like things that I wanted to change. I worked for the Nature Conservancy, and we were doing invasive species control, and we were using some pretty serious chemicals to control a lot of those species. And doing more research into the effects of those chemicals on the environment and on me was pretty disturbing. So I decided to try to buy organic food, to learn more about it, and then do education related to not only being certified organic, but just sort of the practices behind it. So organic is generally chemical free. There are some allowed chemicals that you can use. Most of those are natural chemicals as opposed to synthetic ones. So they can still be harmful. They can still have negative effects, but far less so than your glyphosates and the Garlons of the world. Additionally, people might be interested in organic because they like the idea of looking at that whole farm system. It isn't just a simple substitution model of I use this chemical instead of that chemical. It really does focus on how do I build this entire system to make it as efficient as possible, as well as I've got the little line there a little farther down, working with nature and not against it. So you're really trying not to fight against whatever set of environmental conditions you have, but you're trying to build on what you have and manage it so that you can produce whatever crops or livestock that you want to. Making organic claims. I mentioned that the organic program, you can't use that certified organic logo. You actually can't make any organic claims other than saying we use organic practices or organic principles. You can't say that this carrot that you grew is organic unless you go through the certification process. And there are a couple of other ways that you can do it, but a lot of folks that choose to get certified do so because they want to say, this is organic. I grow this using my organic practices, and I'm certified to do it. We also have a lot of people that come to organic because they are interested in the money. And I've got a slide a little bit later that shows the comparison between an organic system versus one that's not. There is a higher, an ability to set your prices a little bit higher for whatever you're selling, whether it's a commodity or whether it's, organic beef. A lot of folks are moving to organic because they see that additional revenue that it might provide. It usually involves a little bit more of an investment, both in time and money, in order to get that premium for your organic products. But you can make a little bit more. Most folks, though, I think, especially if you've been certified for a little while, you're more interested in the principle of organic and sort of what it means to not use chemicals, to use this holistic system. So I think it's important to kind of consider that. And you can usually tell pretty quickly when you talk to somebody, why they want to get certified. There's nothing wrong with getting certified to make a little bit more money. Ultimately, I kind of see that as, hey, you're still using these organic principles. We're using, less chemicals on the ground, all those kinds of things. It's a positive either way. So it doesn't really matter how you come to it as long as you get there, I guess. I mentioned working with nature and not against it. And honestly, I think that's a key for farming generally. I think too often We're kind of taught that, you've got to fight all the weeds, you've got to fight all of these other things. But if you create a set of conditions that works best for whatever you're trying to grow, you're going to tend to have fewer issues to fight against. And another thing that I think is kind of great about, choosing to be certified is you do have a set of standards. It's not like you're just out there kind of winging it. You have a set of things that are allowed to be done and allowed, and those that aren't. And knowing what those are does kind of keep you sort of constrained, and at least helps you kind of focus on a specific thing. Questions so far? All right. So I talk about it being a marketing thing, and not just like know your market in the literal terms. You're not, it's not just your farmer's market, and you know where it is and you can find it, and that's where you sell your stuff. But know sort of the market as a whole. So one of the things you want to look at is, why are you selling your products in a particular space? So whether you're doing on-farm sales, whether you're selling wholesale, going to the farmer's market, contract, selling to restaurants, whatever those options are, why are you doing that? Is it because you've got a good relationship with a wholesaler and they'll buy everything that you produce? Is it because you're limited on what your market has available to you? Generally, the places that you can sell your products for the best amount are going to be in urban areas, or areas where generally people have a little bit more money to spend on organic produce or organic products generally. Most of our best farmland now isn't as close to those cities. So it's one of the things that you kind of want to think about when you're choosing to be certified. Are you going to be able to sell those products? And is certification necessary to sort of push those products and get maybe more of a premium? I know a lot of producers at my local farmers market, they tend to, I think we only have 2 that are certified. And part of that, and you hear this at a lot of markets, that you can talk to the farmer, they can tell you exactly what they use. For most people, for a lot of people at least, that's enough. Like, you have that conversation, and I think that's fantastic. I think if you can, and I don't want to push you towards certification, but I think if you have a certified organic farm and you can talk to your farmer, I think that is a bonus overall. Whether it justifies the farmer paying the additional amount and the additional time to do certification, that varies. Consider also where you might be able to sell your products otherwise. Think about whether your market can actually handle that additional price. I live in Zanesville, so the Zanesville farmers market, relatively small, not an area that has a whole lot of money. And that's partly why there aren't as many certified organic folks. But if you look at basically the cost of something at the farmer's market, so if I'm buying, radishes that were generally not sprayed with chemicals, they're going to be fairly close to the price at the grocery store for organic produce. So because I'm buying it local from that local farmer, I'm still going to pay fairly close to whatever I would get it at, the local Kroger. And there's something to be said for that also. Would I pay the additional, 50 cents per bunch of radishes? Sure. If it was certified organic, definitely. Also think about, what can your market handle? If you really, really want to grow mixed greens, that, or microgreens, let's say that's your thing, and you really would like to have certified organic microgreens, will you be able to sell those at your market? Or is there a conventional microgreen person that sells out every time? Also, you want to look at, what are your potential other ways to market your products. So that whole idea of diversity of markets. So if you're only selling at the farmer's market and it's a rainy day, or it's a day like today when it's, over 90 degrees, your turnout's going to be lower. You might have some other issues and not be able to sell all of your stuff. So having that alternative market to be able to sell to a restaurant, to the Ohio CAN program, which is a good option that we can talk about more if you want to. Or is there somebody else that's already has certified organic microgreens that you would basically just be competing with one another? This is where I talk about organic is information heavy. You want to do this research, and honestly, if you're farming, you want to do this research anyway to find out, where can I sell my stuff? Because you can really be the best farmer in the world and produce the most fantastic products. But if you can't sell it, what are you going to do with it? That's basically where my wife and I have backyard chickens, and we give them certified organic food. They're not certified because we can't sell them anywhere. We can produce eggs that are delicious, and we can eat more eggs than we can possibly tolerate. But we're not going to be able to sell them for what we produce them or what we pay to produce them. So something else to consider. This might be a little bit difficult to see, but this is a comparison, and this was at a grocery store. So this compares the column on the left is a conventional price. The column in the middle is your organic price. For these various products. And then I highlighted a couple of the areas over here on the right that show the difference for some of the fresh produce that you might be able to buy. And the difference is pretty significant. Sometimes your organic prices are more than double what you would pay conventionally. Why is it more than double? Part of it is, it does cost more to produce that organic head of lettuce as compared to a conventional head of lettuce. If you're growing romaine, obviously you've got slugs, you've got a variety of insects, you've got a bunch of things that you have to do to keep it looking good to sell it at the market. A lot of those things you can't use in an organic system. So you've got to rely on other inputs that tend to be a little bit more expensive. So consequently, you have to charge a little bit more to be able to break even. For instance, if you look at the egg line on here, which you can see there. So $2.59 a dozen is your conventional eggs, which again, economies of scale. You can produce eggs a whole lot cheaper if you have 200,000 birds as compared to 20 in your backyard. So we did a cost comparison as to what we were spending on feed, overall supplies, buying chicks, all that kind of stuff. And just to break even on organic eggs, we would have to charge about $4.30 a dozen. This is one of the things that always frustrates me too, when you see somebody that's got, the $1.50 a dozen or $2 a dozen sign out at the end of their driveway. They're losing money. Like, even if they're using conventional feed and minimal inputs and all that stuff, they're losing money on those eggs. And that makes it more difficult for anybody that's trying to actually make money on those products. So another one of those things to consider whenever you're thinking about pricing and how you're going to sell things. Another thing that I think is really important, and this goes back to the working with nature as opposed to against it, is know your site. I've talked to quite a few, mostly grain producers, but folks that are talking about how wet their soils are all the time and how they struggle to get a crop out of they can't grow soybeans, they can't grow corn, they can't do this, or the crop fails, or this happens or that happens. A lot of that is you are trying to farm in a way that doesn't work with the land that you're given. So I'll show a slide here in a minute that talks about the kind of working with what you have. So think about what your water availability is. Are you trying to grow a crop that does require irrigation? I worked in certification at one point in time in Texas. So I don't know if you visited Texas, a wide variety of environments there. And we had a lot of producers up in the Panhandle, which gets about 12 inches of rain a year. They would talk about how challenging it is to use cover crops and to do diverse rotations. They rely on center pivot irrigation because they only get 12 inches of rain a year. And it's one of those places where I'm like, why are you trying to do this type of farming in this environment? Particularly when, as you know, we read regularly that water is not going to be as widely available as it has been in the past. And that's becoming increasingly challenging. Even in Ohio, you have a lot of sites that are not necessarily conducive for all different types of crops. Or like in the picture on the bottom there, you might have a wetland, or your site maybe was a former wetland. So figure out, you know, how can you use this space to produce what you want to produce, but will still be profitable and have a, you know, minimal ecological impact too. Also think about your pest pressure, because you can't just go out and buy 7 Dust and use that on whatever, you know, product you want to. If you want to get beautiful apples like these ones in this picture, which are certified organic, you've got to use a whole suite of solutions to get to that point. So if you are in a place that you know you have lots of insect pests for a particular crop that you want to grow, that might limit your ability to be certified organic. Or you might have to look at a different type of managing that particular crop or that particular site in order to produce things organically. Another thing to think about is your proximity to conventional agriculture. And the reason that I mention this is if you are a certified organic farm, you have to ensure that your organic crops are not contaminated with conventional seed or overspray. It's kind of ridiculous that this is put on the organic farm's responsibility to make sure that, you know, their neighbor's stuff doesn't end up on their property. It could probably should be flipped. But the way that the system is set up, if you are a certified organic operation, you are responsible for making sure that your crop doesn't get contaminated. So the way that we do that is through buffers, and there isn't a particular type of buffer or width of buffer that you have to use. Basically, it's some type of line along your property that makes sure that your neighbor doesn't accidentally spray your crops. This can be pretty challenging, especially if you are in a rural area that is dominated by conventional crops. It's one of the things that we deal with in my garden. We have conventional soybeans and corn right across the way. And on really windy days, which typically they don't spray on really windy days, but every once in a while they do, there's definitely a concern that some of that overspray will end up on our property and will be a challenge. Another thing that I encourage anyone that's farming to do is figure out your soils on your site. So for instance, the family farm, you know, that's been passed down for generations. It's not like we looked at, oh, where can we farm this particular thing? This is what we have. And I think that happens a lot, that you just kind of either inherit it or you it becomes available and you decide to do whatever you can to farm it. So that happens. But when you actually can certify or buy new property, one of the things that I think is really important to do is look at the soils. And that will inform you what that land is most suitable for. And it could tell you, you know, don't try to grow potatoes in this soil, or blueberries, or, you know, whatever the crop is, based strictly off the soils. You can amend soils and basically, I talked a lot about it in the last session. There are tons of ways that you can improve your soils, but that does require additional inputs, additional money to build the soil quality that's there. So if you are starting from scratch and looking for a property that you want to farm on, if you can find a site with good soil already, that's additional building of soil quality is like, icing on the cake. You're basically taking something that's pretty good already and you're improving it. And to be certified organic, you have to continually maintain or improve the quality of the soil. I'll show you the web soil survey here real quick. Okay, so this is my family's farm. If you go to the web soil survey, you have to navigate through a couple of pages to do this, but there's a little start web soil survey button that you'll push. It'll bring you to a map of the entire US, and then you can use these little icons up here to zoom in on your particular area of interest. And you have to, when you do the little area of interest thing, computer is not super fast, but it will show you, here's the farm.
Casey, I hate to interrupt, but I think you're still showing us your PowerPoint.
Oh,
if you can
okay.
switch to your
I don't know how to do that then. We'll just go back to the PowerPoint. So your web soil survey is a way that you can look at the specific map of your farm. So the nice thing with that is that it not only will show you the map of the farm and what types of soil you have, but it will also show you, you can click on that particular type of soil and it will show you this is, ideal or prime farmland, or this is characterized by really wet soils. So that can help you determine what you want to grow and where. The map here that shows sort of typical soil regions throughout Ohio. Basically, if you look at all of Southeast Ohio, so all of that green area, that's unglaciated. So soils there are generally pretty poor and not suitable for growing a lot of our, typical crops, the corn and soybeans of the world. They're really good for grazing. And that's partly why the picture behind us is pretty much all grass. It's in that green area, and my grandpa in the past had grown corn and doesn't produce very much, but he grew it for pigs that were used, on the farm. And production wasn't, high levels of production wasn't necessarily the primary goal. But it does a pretty good job of growing grass, and that grass can then be fed to ruminant animals, whether it's, cattle or sheep or goats. So using that sort of broader soil profile, another thing that I think is interesting to consider is that pink area in the northwestern part of the state. That was all wetland. That's part of the Black Swamp. It's an area that can be very productive, but it requires a lot of drainage and a lot of consideration of the fact that it wants to be wet, like working with nature, not against it. So think about what the land wants to do and what it wants to be, and you can kind of mold your system around that. If you look at the typical soil profile on the left there, that is typical Southeast Ohio, where you have a very thin layer of topsoil, very thin organic matter layer, and then you're into sort of either a clay aggregate, or in this case, sort of a rocky aggregate. So if you were up on the hilltop on my family's farm, you would be down to stone within about 2 feet. If you're down in the valley, you've got 3 or 4 feet before you're into like heavy clay. So again, things to consider about knowing your site and thinking about, what you actually have available. Next, this is sort of that philosophical component of organic certification, is know yourself. Think about what your goals are. Do you want to make sure that whatever you're producing is just sold in your local community? Do you want to have, global reach with whatever it is you're producing? Think about it not only short term, but also, over the duration of a particular site. Particularly because it does take a significant amount of time to build that organic system and to become certified. It's, a 3-year process from, you decide that you want to certify your ground to the time that you can actually be certified for most sites. So think about your goals and figure out if it sort of fits into becoming certified. Also, going back to that sort of the principles of organic, or why are you getting certified? Are you the tree hugger like I am, where you want to have this natural system and you want to grow things organically and hang out with bees in the garden? Like that's a different mentality than if you want to produce organic soybeans in a somewhat conventional way that you have, a 3 or 4 crop rotation. It's different. So figure out what your goals are and kind of what you want to get out of the whole experience. Why are you certifying? Think about your organizational skills. This is one of the biggest challenges that we have with a lot of our producers is that we have fantastic farmers. If you think about some of the best farmers may not be very organized at all. So it can be challenging sometimes to do the amount of paperwork and to organize your field history sheets and to make sure that all of those things are available and legible to your certifier. If you don't necessarily have the organizational skills, do you have, a friend, a partner, a somebody that can help you get things organized? OEFFA and a lot of other certifiers will provide a lot of the paperwork as well to kind of put you in a little bit of a box and make it a little bit easier to become certified. But if your desk looks like the bottom one here, it might be a little bit more challenging than if you're a really organized person. Also, kind of going back to, thinking about what your goals are. If you are super organized and you want to become certified and you're good at it and you have the resources to do it, it's completely achievable. There are 20,000 certified operations in the US, not to mention however many there are, globally. So there are a lot of folks that you can kind of lean on to get that information. And that's one of the resources, looking at, do you have a mentor? Do you have a entity or a company that can help you through the certification process? And on farm, it is a 3-year transition period. So do you have the resources available both from an educational perspective as well as from a financial perspective to be able to become certified and go through that transition process? It can be challenging sometimes because you're using the organic practices, but you're not yet certified organic. So you can't necessarily sell things for that organic premium that you were getting before. And I think it's really important to be somebody that's willing to learn and to try these new things. If you're somebody that's really, really rigid and not interested in kind of adapting to a situation, organics is going to be challenging. And a lot of agriculture is going to be challenging for you. That whole idea of, this is the way that my grandparents did it and my dad and so on and so on. That's particularly more challenging as the climate is changing and things become a little bit more difficult to deal with. So we've talked a lot about some of the things that go along with organic certification. I do want to give you some other options, so not just organic certification, but I'll kind of summarize specifically what the challenges are with becoming certified organic. Because it's process-based, it really does help if you're somebody that kind of thinks in that way. And not just the process of certification, that there are, multiple steps and you do this step, then you do this one and so on, but the farming itself is part of a process. So you're building soils, you're selecting species that fit within your particular area. You are looking at that holistic picture of kind of what's going on. So it is a process. It isn't just, let's jump out there and become certified. It does require a significant amount of paperwork, and not just the paperwork that you fill out and send into your certifier. It's also kind of keeping track of, what inputs are you using. The more information that you have about what works and what hasn't worked, I think it makes you a better farmer overall, and it definitely makes you a better certified organic farmer. I always encourage people when they're thinking about becoming certified, if you've never tracked, your seeding or your harvest records or any of those things, if you haven't kept good records in the past, becoming certified or even just using the paperwork that we use for certified organic operations, it's going to make you a better farmer because you're going to have more of that information. It's going to kind of inform what you may decide to do in the future. I mentioned that holistic, systems-based. I like that, thinking about big picture. My degree's in ecology, so I mean, it kind of makes sense. It also encourages a really strong understanding of those ecological systems. So knowing, you have a serious issue with weevils because you've created a winter habitat that they can overwinter because you left litter on the ground. Or you didn't remove all the apples when they dropped, so now you have some type of borer problem or another pest species. So understanding how this behavior or this treatment affects the ecology of that particular system as a whole kind of helps make the farming process a little bit easier. Organic farming can be a lot more labor intensive, maybe a little bit more hand labor. You can't just go out and hook up the sprayer and douse everything. You have to be a little bit more targeted into sort of the way that you do the whole process. And it is a front-loaded system. Like I said, you learn all this stuff ahead of time. You're definitely, doing things as you go, but the people that are successful tend to do a lot of that research ahead of time and then can kind of follow through after that. Okay, so I'm not going to dissuade you from organic certification. If it's something that works for your farm, absolutely pursue it. And obviously we're here to help. Additionally, if you want to pursue any of these other certifications or claims, we're here to help for that too. We've all heard these terms, sustainable, regenerative, naturally grown, non-GMO, biodynamic. Maybe fewer people have heard biodynamic, but it's out there. It's a thing. These are other claims and other certifications that you can seek either in addition to being certified organic or instead of certified organic. The one that's sort of used most widely and I guess for the longest period of time has been sustainable. And sustainable is a little bit difficult to sort of pin down. I mean, it's in my job title as Sustainable Agriculture Educator because it is sort of all-encompassing. Literally able to be maintained at a certain rate or level, according to the Webster's Dictionary. So whatever it is, if you can maintain it at about the same level, so whether that's your soils, whether that's the plant community, whatever, that could be considered a sustainable type of farming. USDA likes definitions. So the definition that they use is farming in such a way to protect the environment, aid and expand natural resources, and to make the best of non-renewable resources, best use of non-renewable resources. So there are actually some certifiers out there that do a sustainable farming or some type of sustainable farming practice or certification. So a few that I highlighted here, Rainforest Alliance is one that you see a lot on coffee and products that are generally grown in the rainforest, cashews, those kinds of things. That is a type of sustainable certification, depending upon kind of what you want to do. If you look at SCS Global Services, they have a specific sustainable agriculture certification. So this is sustainably grown products. They also do all sorts of other types of certification as that particular company. It's pretty huge. Anywhere from you can certify your sustainable business or your alternative energy building, whatever else. Friends of the Earth also is another type of certifier that does some type of sustainable certification. These are ones, the specific ones like Rainforest Alliance, there's a market there for them. I've definitely looked at one bag of coffee versus another bag of coffee and gone with the one with the Rainforest Alliance. And that's ultimately what you're kind of looking at when you're thinking about certification. If you are labeled sustainably grown, there's a subset of people out there that are going to look for your product and pay a little bit more for it, maybe over another one. So something to consider. The standards are widely variable depending upon what that certification is and what you're certifying. So if you're trying to raise your cattle sustainably, like these ones here on the hill, which are our cattle, it's a different set of requirements than if you're raising CBD hemp, like the one in the upper right, or straw on the bottom. So depending upon what the product is, depending upon what kind of certification you want to go with, sustainable is an option. The one that we're hearing more than just about anything else here lately is regenerative. And regenerative is challenging the base definition there of relating to or characterized by regeneration, which is a horrible definition. But basically it's looking at regenerating topsoil and improving biodiversity as a whole, looking at carbon sequestration, and basically strengthening the overall health and vitality of the soil. Good definition, if you're looking at regenerating your soils, that's kind of a great way to look at it. There are standards, which we'll look at a couple of those here in a second. But depending upon the entity that is either doing the certification or talking about regenerative agriculture, it's a really, really different picture of what is and isn't regenerative. If you're Cargill, regenerative is something very different than if you are OEFFA or the Rodale Institute or one of those other entities. So the type of farming that you do greatly differs as to how you can be considered regenerative or not. So some of the certifications that are out there, A Greener World does a regenerative agriculture certification and also lists a few other options out there. The first one that I came across is Regenified. Regenified is started, or one of the founders is Gabe Brown. So Gabe Brown, if you do a Google search, he is pretty widely known for integrating livestock into his agricultural like grain production. So he'll do cover crops and then graze it as a way of terminating those cover crops, and helped develop this Regenified set of standards. So each one of these entities has their own set of standards. So it isn't like the organic certification where it's one big box that all of these other certifiers adhere to these particular standards. But each one of these kind of builds off the same set of regenerative principles. So building soil quality, integrating livestock is on a lot of these, minimizing or eliminating tillage. And that's where you see a lot of the conventional operations that are no-till, still relying on chemicals, but they're not tilling the soil as much. So that's considered a form of regenerative agriculture. Sorry for the little dinging in the background. My phone's doing weird things. So Regenified is one. I encourage you all to look at all of these websites just to kind of get an idea of kind of what's out there. Savory International is Alan Savory, who's been doing grazing in South Africa and other parts of the world for many decades. And he has his own type of certification that is looking at regenerating those natural ecosystems using livestock. So if you think about the picture that's here, this native prairie, you know, that used to cover the vast majority of the central part of the US. And bison were the primary driver, bison and fire were the drivers of those systems. So it's kind of looking at that whole, you know, the same concept of working with nature, not against it. You're putting these herbivores on the land because these plants evolved with those species present. And then it's sort of a dual certification, the Regenerative Organic Alliance. To be regenerative organic certified, you have to be certified organic first. And then it adds on additional principles about regeneration of soil. So you're looking at soil health, animal welfare standards, which are not present in the organic certification for the most part. There are a few in there, but not as much. And then social fairness, which the organic standards don't address at all. So it basically takes that organic certification and tacks on these additional tenets, which address a lot of the challenges that organic certification has had, that there are you know, large scale dairies out in the Western US that will have, you know, 4,000 animals and just barely meet the organic standard. They meet the standard. And there are a lot of different farms and systems that technically meet the standard, but they don't meet the principle. And this is one of the certifications that tries to kind of take those original organic principles and apply it to a certification. So I encourage you to check this one out also. Again, you're getting certified organic to do this, and most of the folks that do this certification also will do your organic certification. OEFFA currently isn't one of those entities, though. Not necessarily a step down, but a step sideways from certified organic is certified naturally grown. I think one of the greatest things about this type of certification is that it's farmers certifying farmers, which there's another certification that is, I'm not talking about in this presentation, but I can talk about it in the next one, is the Real Organic Project, which is also addressing some of the same things and is a peer-reviewed certification. But naturally grown is a good one. There's actually somebody at my local farmers market that has the certification. It is standards based. It's based more on organic principles, not necessarily the you can use this, but you can't use that. Still, you know, no synthetic chemicals, no GMOs, but it gives you a little bit more of a if you do have a severe pest issue, or if you do have some type of major problem, you can still use some of the conventional treatments if you have to. But it's kind of meant to be like, your cattle are sick, you can use antibiotics and not lose your certification. Whereas in certified organic, if your cattle are sick, you can use antibiotics, but your cattle lose certification. So trade-offs. But the key with this is transparency. So it's really looking at a natural system. How do we certify these things, and how are the farmers helping each other get certified? Non-GMO project is singular focus, and I'm sure you've all seen this logo on a ton of different products. Basically, there are no genetically modified organisms in whatever that product is. So for a lot of folks that do get certified organic, this is one of the motivators. If you are certified organic, you're also non-GMO, because that's not allowed in organic operations. But if your primary concern is not having any genetically modified organisms or products in whatever it is you're producing or manufacturing, then this is a certification that you can go for that's sort of singularly focused. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is biodynamic certification. I think biodynamic is really, really interesting because it really looks at that whole systems approach. So you notice sort of a unifying theme with all of these other certifications is that there's a component of organic certification that each of these either uses or sort of builds off of. So biodynamic uses a lot of the same principles and requirements of being certified organic, but you can't just certify one field. You've got to certify an entire farm, whereas that's something in organic you can do. We have a bunch of producers that have conventional fields and organic fields, and there's a whole challenge of keeping all those things separate. In biodynamic, it's just that. It's the whole farm. You're doing everything, everything's certified, no changes. The other key with this is that it really looks at keeping everything on that farm. So everything that's certified is on that individual farm. You're trying to minimize your inputs, your off-farm inputs, and you're also trying to minimize any other issues coming on the farm from elsewhere. The other thing that it really depends on a lot is particular types of field sprays and compost preparations. And this is one of the areas that biodynamics can be a little bit challenging because you're adding a certain number of ingredients to a bucket and you're stirring it a certain number of times, and then you're adding that to your compost, and then that eventually goes out onto your fields. The key with all of these different preparations, and they have different numbers depending upon kind of what you do, is that you are adding micronutrients and you're adding those things that the compost needs to sort of help develop a little bit more. And I think the most important thing with biodynamic is that you're really paying attention to what's going on the farm. And just that additional level of attention adds a greater level of quality to the farm as a whole. So even if people get hung up on the field sprays and preparations and when you do things and planting timing and all that kind of stuff, the basis of biodynamic is you're paying attention to what's going on in the farm, and you're creating that cycle of nutrients and water and everything else on the farm. So you're creating your own little ecosystem, which is kind of great. Okay, so you've been listening to me talk for quite a while. I'm going to give you these additional resources if any of these certifications is interesting. If you want to learn more about organic specifically, or just the principles and practices that go along with organic, sustainable, regenerative, biodynamic, any of these other ones, these are some great resources that you can check out. Your local Natural Resource Conservation Service Center is a good place to potentially get funding to do some of these things. Same with the FSA, the Farm Service Agency. There is an organic cost share program, which we'll talk more about next week, that will help offset some of the cost of certification. Oregon Tilth is an organization similar to OEFFA that does certification, but also has a great educational component, and they've got a lot of good resources on their website. I regularly refer people to SARE and to ATRA. Both of those entities offer tons of free resources, whether it's webinars similar to this one or literally free books that will talk about managing weeds on your farm, which I have 2 of those copies on my desk right now. Those are free, so you can download the PDF for free. It's pretty great. Rodale Institute's been doing a lot of organic research for 30 years, comparing conventional systems with organic systems, as well as they have crop consultants and a huge set of resources. Your local extension agent is also a good resource for the most part. I didn't mean to put that qualifier on there, sorry. They're great resources. It just depends on, everywhere has their own specific focus area. So you may not necessarily have the person in your county that is going to help you with organic certification or with the organic process, but they're going to know somebody that can hook you up. So Central State University or Ohio State are your sources there. You can Google all sorts of information. There are 15,000 YouTube videos about everything. So some of those are great. Some of those are not as great, but there's a lot of information out there. And as always, you're welcome to contact us if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about here, or random cattle questions or soils or whatever. OEFFA is always here as a resource. Myself and then my counterparts, John and Johnny, we're always available to try to help you through certification process or anything else that you have questions about. With that being said, do you all have questions for me that I can help you with today?
I went ahead and changed the settings so you are able to unmute yourself if you needed anything.
All right. Well, if you don't have any questions, that's fine. I threw a ton of information at you. Feel free to digest that. You're welcome to give me a call, send me an email, and I appreciate you attending and listening to me ramble for an hour. Like I said, if you do have questions, feel free to give us a call. This recording will be available to watch a little bit later. And hopefully you all will be at our last installment of the Organics 101 series, which will talk about the actual certification process. So we'll go pretty in depth into what you need to do once you decide to become certified. If you are already, you have paperwork or you're thinking about it, bring it with and ask questions as far as we can. We'll answer what we can answer. See how that goes.
Casey, did you have anything you wanted to share about the help shop that's associated with this?
Yes. If something pops into your head beforehand, next Monday from 1 to 3, we have an organics help shop. So we do these virtual help shops every month, and some months they have a topic that we are specifically focused on. So this next week's topic is this particular program. So if something pops into your head and you want to jump onto that Zoom call, ask your questions, there will likely be 3 or 4 folks to answer questions, as well as you can kind of work through, hear what some other folks are asking, and we'll have that conversation too. So also informal. You can drop in at any point during that 1 to 3 time period. We'll be there. Yeah, so if there aren't any other questions, we'll go ahead and stop recording. And again, thank you very much. And we'll hopefully see you at the next one.